Okay, so excuse the background noise. Today I've got someone doing some work outside my house. Not on my house, but outside my house. So it's a bit annoying when you're trying to record a video, but such is life. So what I'm going to talk about today is how we can do these stepped animations with a very simple piece of JavaScript and it's just some animation CSS. So this is often used in headers or highlighted lines. It's not an entrance animation. It's a continuous animation based on a class that's added. So if we look at what's actually generated here, if I look at this first section here, so it's basically a standard Elementor heading element, which is set to an H2, which doesn't matter in this case. And then what we've got is each of the letters in this word header, we've got segmented with a mark attribute. And on that mark attribute, we've got some style, which sets our speed, which is the duration that each one of these will animate, the delay, which will set, and it's basically the delay between each one starting its animation. So this one would start at 0, that one starts at 500 milliseconds, the next one starts at 1000 milliseconds, etc. And which keyframe animations do we actually want to use? So I've created some keyframes called fade in, fade out. Sorry, just fade in, out. So we look at this second animation, exactly the same structure with marks. In this case, it's 2-second animation. We've got delays, the same as the other one. Keyframes called rotate in, out. I've got an animation timing function of a cubic bezier. Now, what I can do with that is I can change that by changing the way this animation works just by playing around with this. And if you watch this animation here, as I play around with that cubic bezier, changes the way it animates. We can play around with the animation, we can copy this cubic bezier, put it in some attributes, and we've got our new animation. So I'm going to go over to the actual code that makes this work. So basically in here we've got a standard Elementor header, so I've got 2 of those. In my content, all I've done is separate each section that I want to animate separately. Now, this could be a word, so it could be HA, and that will animate as an item. The E word element as an item, so it can be whatever you like in there. It can be words, can be letters. So I've basically got a letter, space, then another mark, another letter, another space. Give me this header attribute here. The only other couple of things I've got to do here is go to my advanced tab. I've got to add a class called stepped animation, and my JavaScript will use this to add the attributes to the CSS. And then down in the attributes, I've got a few attributes on this one. So I've got data -keyframe, so that's the keyframe, CSS keyframes I want to use. Speed, which is how long does each of these animate for. The delay between each one starting, so 0, 500, 1000, 1500, etc. I'm not actually using this attribute, I'm not sure what I still got there. Mark background, or mark BG, set to transparent. I'm using mark attributes here, and I'll explain why. So by default, it'll have a yellow background, so I'm just telling it to make it transparent. You can do whatever you like with that. You can put a hex color in there, RGB color, whatever you like. Leave it as it is. I've got it set to transparent here. And the reason I do that is if we go back over to this code here. So when we add the heading widget, we've got a div up here, another div which is the container. In this case, we've got an H2, and then we've got a mark. Now, by using marks which are not used generally for markup, I can search for these and I can split those without having to look for divs with a particular class or spans with a particular class. It's just easier if I just make it a mark. Then I don't have to worry about adding classes to separate them out. So heading back over to here, so that's basically each of these, that's pretty much what it is. So on my second one, exactly the same markup for the text and the title. Same class that I add to the CSS classes. What's different is these attributes down here. where I'm telling my keyframes in this time to be rotate in and out. The other one was fade in and out. I'm using an animation timing function of a cubic Bezier, which I just showed you before, and I'll show you how you can change that. The speed of each of these animations is 2 seconds, with a delay between each of two. So 0, 200 milliseconds, 400 milliseconds, 600 milliseconds, etc. And setting my mark background transparent again. That's pretty much all there is to the markup of these headers. This could just as easily be a text box. So I can put a text editor on here, put marks around the words that I want to animate, put the parameters in here for the keyframes I want to use, speeds, all that sort of stuff. I might actually do that at the end of this just to show you that. And then we head over to our code. Now, don't get too wound up in this yet. I'm just going to look at this JavaScript function. All we're doing, waiting for the DOM to be ready so that we've got access to jQuery. And actually, I probably should rename that, add delays, add attributes, I should say. Working this out as I go, and that makes more sense. So what this is going to do is use jQuery selector, which I've determined up here is, where are we? So the stepped animations, so that's the class you will add to the widget so that it can find these. So it finds all of those, iterates through each of these that it finds, and it gets the, iterates through each of these selectors. It then gets a jQuery object for each of these. We then get the speed, item delay, mark background, keyframes, animation timing function. Anything that you want to add as an attribute. So basically, you just add an attribute with data hyphen, then the name you want, and then we can translate that into a JavaScript variable simply by doing this. So that's the getting the attributes and assigning those to variables. Then for each of these that it finds, each of these widgets that it finds, we want to find all the marks in there. So that was the markup we do when we split each letter, in this case with a mark. Iterate through each of those. We get the index and then the element. And we use the index for calculating our delay. And then basically on this element, we're going to get a jQuery object. So that will be each individual mark, and set the CSS as a variable, which is the 2 hyphens. Speed is whatever the speed attribute was set, plus milliseconds. Same with the delay, same with the background color for the marks, same with the keyframes, same with the animation time in effect. So this is the same for every single type of animation we want. All we have to change is our attributes. Now, in the first case, we said we wanted to be a fade in, fade out. So up here at the stepped animation mark, we're setting its inline block so that we can set transform properties on it. And we're setting the background color to the BG color. So that was the mark BG that we set in the attributes. Animation duration to the speed we set in the attributes. The delay to the delay that we set in the attributes, which is basically in here, it's taking the index, so which number, so 0, 1, 2, 3, multiplied by the delay so that it steps through them. So each iteration adds the amount of delay in milliseconds to it. So each single individual mark is going to have its own properties that is going to be defined here. So we want it to be infinite, so we want to go backwards and forwards for infinite. Keyframes, so in this case we set the keyframes to be fade in, fade out, and the timing effect. With the timing effect, we've also set a animation timing effect variable on the parent of this mark, so just on the actual widget, so that if we don't specify it, it will use that. So this, if you want any defaults, set them up in here, and it will use those unless you specify them in an attribute, which will override them. So it's a good way of having defaults. So Cool thing with jQuery is that when you add the CSS, if the attribute is undefined, it just doesn't add the attribute, so it won't mess up your animation function in this case, timing function. So if it doesn't exist, it won't add it, which means it'll use the default. So we can use animation speed. What are we using here? The background color. In fact, I might even set that there to BG. Color is transparent. Okay, then if we do not specify the mark BG, it's going to find it from here and it's going to make it transparent. If we do specify it, then it's going to use whatever we specified. So that's a good way of having defaults. All right, so in this case, it calls the animation timing function of fade and fade out, which is a typical animation keyframes. So all we're doing here, just for a little bit of effect, opacity to 0, translate Y of 0, so 0 point. At 50%, we want the opacity to go to 1, and we translate the Y by -8 pixels, so move it up a bit. And then at 100%, move it back to translate Y 0. So let's have a look at what that's doing. So that's moving up there by -8 pixels, and then it drops back down to 0 while it fades in and out with the opacity. That's pretty much the first one. The second one is the rotate in and out, and again it's just the opacity from 0 to 1 back to 0. In this case, we're rotating by -10 degrees, translating the X, so we're moving it side. Let's make that a little bit more extreme. Let's make it say 25 pixels and make that 25. So we want to go -25, back to 0, rotate to 10 degrees and go to 25 that way. So let's have a look what that looks like. I'm just going to refresh this page. So that's the original. Refresh. Made it more extreme by making it 25 pixels to 25 pixels. Again, we can play with the, where are we? Animation timing function. Here. Let's make that a little bit less extreme. Okay, so let's pinch that animation timing function there. Go back to our attributes over here, into the attributes, and we'll put that cubic bezier there. Back to here, refresh the page. And just change the way that comes in and out. So what we're doing when we add the cubic bezier, we're adding a curve. So when we look at the keyframes from 0 through to 100%, it's not a linear transition. So it follows the Bezier curve. So in this one, we're going quickly to 50, we're staying there for a little bit, and then we're going quickly to 100 by the cubic Bezier that I just did. So it's a really easy way of changing animations. Let's say we have a different one here where I'm going to just create a new one. I'm going to call that messed up, where we'll go rotate X, translate, let's translate the Y as well. Y, go the opposite actually, we'll go translate Y by 25 pixels. Then we'll go to here, translate Y to 0. That to -25 pixels. So this is a really odd animation. So let's change get the keyframes from here. And we'll go back to this widget here into our attributes and set our keyframes to messed up. Okay, so I'm going to press F5 here. Totally different animation. So really, really good way of just doing all sorts of animations that you want to use. These are a bit extreme. I wouldn't use these in a production site, but this is just being extreme to show you how you can actually do this. If we wanted to, we can see what this looks like with a standard one like ease. An ease doesn't look as jumbled. That's only on the one, sorry. Let's go back to here and we'll set our timing function to ease. There we go. Different animations. That smooths, comes in the middle, it's smooth, and then it goes out again. So really, really easy way to add these constant animations by splitting using a mark attribute. And you use the same JavaScript regardless. So you only need this once, create this bit once, add stepped animation to your widget as a class. So just in here, stepped animation, add your attributes that you want. You might have different attributes. You might want it to do different things. You can easily add those attributes, get those attributes as constants, save them on the mark as a variable, and then up in your properties up here, or maybe even in the animations keyframes, you can use those variables just by going var and then whatever the variable name is that you've given it. So that's pretty much it. So hopefully that's something that you will find very useful.